We've had some technological issues. Okay. Okay, so you should, in a minute, be able to see.
This is just clicking to change slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, can everyone see that? Excellent.
All good. All good?
Yep.
Oh. Oh, no, we need to go back one. Well, thanks everyone for coming today. Hopefully in this talk we'll be able to share some of our experiences of our time on Gough Island. We do feel immensely lucky to have been able to spend 13 months on what's probably the most spectacular and unforgettable place that we've ever been, barring the Northumberland coast, of course. We'd be lying if we said it was all plain sailing whilst we were down there, and there were definitely some pretty difficult times, but these were far outweighed by the many unforgettable experiences that we had. We do have some videos that we usually incorporate into this talk, but due to difficulties in technology, we found that if we played the video, it slowed the talk down big time, and we were worried that you wouldn't be able to catch up with the slide that we'd clicked to, so it'd all go out of kilter. So what we're going to do, we're going to run through the talk, and then hopefully, all things being well, we'll then play the videos that we'd usually incorporate into the talk, just to give you a bit more of an idea of the kind of stuff that we do on Gough. So in the talk, hopefully we'll be able to cover the following topics, and we'll do our best not to go off on tangents because we're quite good at that when we talk about Gough. So we'll start with a general introduction, and then we'll go on to the problems that the island and the wildlife face. And then we'll hopefully have a bit of time at the end for questions. So yeah, fingers crossed technology doesn't fail us and you're all able to follow the talk.
So I've spoken to a few of you about Gough a little bit in the past, but just quite a lot of people have never heard of it because it's so remote. So just a bit of background on it. So it's basically right in the middle of the South Atlantic. It's a volcanic island and it's just off the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So on a map, if you look kind of halfway between Cape Town and Rio de Janeiro, it's about halfway between the two. So it's in the roaring 40s, which means it gets really windy, especially in the winter. So during some of the winter storms, we were having to move our beds away from the wall on the base because it was shaking so much. I got seasick at one point, which is good fun. So here it is. So it's pretty remote. It takes about a week to get there by boat from Cape Town, which means that if you fall over in the field and you break your leg, you're in for a bumpy ride. So it's part of the Tristan da Cunha group of islands. So it's the most remote inhabited archipelago in the world. So Tristan da Cunha has about 260 people living on it. And then Gough is about a day's sail to the southeast of Tristan da Cunha, so it's even more remote. So here you go. So this is Tristan, and Gough is all the way down to the south.
Lovely, isn't it? So yeah, how did we get there? So as you can imagine, it's not particularly straightforward, being so far away. So we began with 6 weeks of training with the RSPB in the UK, doing everything from wilderness survival and first aid to, well, actually our first day of training was going to the dentist to make sure that we didn't have any underlying issues that might cause us to be medevaced from the island, because obviously that's a huge logistical nightmare and would cost a lot of money. So yeah, not the most fun first day, but it was all right. So we then flew to Cape Town for a further 2 weeks of training with the South African government, and where we actually met the rest of our team, the other 7 members of our team who are from South Africa. So this is the mighty Agulhas 2, which is South Africa's only ice-breaking ship. This was how we got there. So we left Cape Town on the 1st of September 2016. It's an amazing boat, state of the art. It also has the cheapest bar that either of us have ever been to, which was an added bonus. So we didn't see land again until the very early hours of the morning on the 7th of September. So this is departing Cape Town on the 1st of September 2016. So we didn't really miss seeing land because on the way we saw some pretty spectacular wildlife, so incredible seabirds, so and also cetacean whales and dolphins as well. So this is a black-browed albatross. These don't actually nest on Gough, but they do nest on the Falkland Islands. That's what holds most of the world's population, is the Falkland Islands. Amazing birds. And these are great shearwaters. So we have the similarly related species, the Manx shearwater, that nest mostly on the Welsh Islands, Skoma, Skocum, Ramsey, places like that. So great shearwaters, a bit bigger, and the Tristan group pretty much holds the entire global population, estimated about 5 million pairs on the Tristan archipelago. And then this is a species called a spectacle petrel, quite aptly named by its distinctive eye markings. So these most of the world's population nest on Inaccessible Island, which is another one of the Tristan archipelago. These are beautiful birds, absolutely stunning, quite mysterious. It's thought that they might actually nest on Gough, but no one's actually confirmed it yet. So that might be something that's found out in the future. So then on the morning of the 7th of September, this is what greeted us. So this is Tristan da Cunha. It's a very, very quite picture book looking island. It's a volcano that rises to about 2,000 meters right out of the middle of the South Atlantic. So we spent 36 hours unloading cargo for the islanders and offloading passengers because the Agulhas is also used by the islanders to get backwards and forwards to Cape Town. It was particularly special for me to see Tristan, as my grandparents were actually the administrators there from 1957 to 1959, and my mum was actually born on the island. So I was the first family member to see Tristan since 1959. So that was a very special moment for me. So on the afternoon of the 8th of September, after unloading all the cargo and the passengers from Tristan, we then set off again. So we've got Tristan at the top here, and you can just see the snowy peak. I think it's Queen Anne or Queen Mary's Peak. I can't remember, but it's about 2,000 meters. And then below that, we've got just on the left, the island on the left, it's called Nightingale Island. It's about 20 miles away from Tristan. Amazing seabird island. So we dropped a field team off there. And then just on the right hand side, you might be able to just make out, I don't know whether you can see the mouse, but this small island here in the background, that's Inaccessible. So that's where the spectacle petrels nest. Both of these islands are ones that we'd very much like to go to and do some field work on. So then after sailing overnight, we glimpsed Gough for the first time on the morning of the 9th of September 2016. We gradually drew nearer and nearer. Here we go. And after an equally excited and nervous wait, we got on a helicopter for the first time in our lives. Never been in a helicopter before. And flew onto the island, and this is what greets you. So Gough's quite often likened to Jurassic Park, and this was a sign that was made by a field team a few years before ours, and it greets you at the helipad when you land.
So the first thing you have to do when you land is find your way around, which isn't particularly easy. So you have about 3 weeks with the outgoing team, and their job is to teach you the job and teach you the way around the island and how to be safe. So Gough Base is here in the southeast of the island, so that's where you live. But then, so as you can see, there's these paths all the way around, although they're paths in the loosest sense of the word. Most of the time they're more like streams than anything else. And it's very, very mountainous. You can see from the contour lines, it's not particularly easy to get around. Pretty much wherever you want to be, there is a mountain in the way that you have to get over first. So it's only 13 kilometres long, Gough, but because it's so mountainous, it can take so long to walk anywhere. It takes you basically the whole day to walk the length of the island. And the highest point is 910 metres. So for any of the climbers out there, that's about as high as Scafell Pike, which is the tallest mountain in England. But when you consider that you're coming sort of 2-3 miles from sea level, that gets quite steep. So Gough Dale, which is one of our main monitoring colonies, which I now can't see, is that it?
Yeah.
There we go. So that is less than 2 miles away from the base, and it's only about 400 metres high, so it's not particularly, you don't have to gain too much height, but it will take you about 2 hours to walk there, and that's before you do your day's work, and then you have to get home again for dinner. And the paths are just really steep, they're really wet, there's quite high vegetation, so during the summer some of the vegetation was sort of up over my head, and then there's also burrows everywhere because there's so many ground nesting birds on the island, and they quite like the paths because they don't have to get through all the. So you're constantly falling over. You sort of walk 10 steps and then fall over. So yeah, it's good fun. So the history of Gough is a bit controversial, as with a lot of colonial places. So the English claim to have discovered it in the 18th century, and it's named after the captain of the boat, Charles Gough, that found it. But it was probably actually discovered a lot earlier than that by the Portuguese. So it's really heavily protected because it's so ecologically important. So it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's also a Ramsar wetland site. So there's no permanent residents on the island at all. The only people that are on the island is a team of 10, and we were part of that. So it's sort of a rolling system where you'll be on the island for a year, and then the next team take over from you, and the next team from you. So we were the 62nd overwintering team. We were Gough 62. So we overlapped with Gough 61 for 3 weeks at the start, and they taught us the job. And then we did the same for Gough 63 at the very end. That's the last thing that you do. So the team of 10 is made up of 7 people from South Africa and then 3 people from the UK who were sent out by the RSPB. So there's us 3 biologists, there was 3 meteorologists, 1 medic, 1 radio technician, 1 diesel mechanic and 1 electrician. And that's you for 14 months. They're the only people that you see. So every team has a team photo. It hangs up in the bar, which is one of the rooms in the base that you're very lucky to have. So this was our team, this was Gough 62. And this is us at midwinter. So midwinter is kind of like Christmas for Antarctic and subantarctic bases. So Christmas is in the middle of the summer because you're in the southern hemisphere. So come winter, it can get quite dark and dreary. So you have to make a big deal out of midwinter. So this is us having a big meal, and we exchange gifts. We decorated the base. And I think we had a party in the bar afterwards, I think. Yeah,
we swim in the waterfall. I think.
Oh yeah, so there's this very odd tradition on Gough where the team on midwinter morning will go to this waterfall and jump in the pond at the bottom of it in the pool, and it's absolutely freezing cold. I think it's the coldest water I've ever experienced. There's only 3 of us that were stupid enough to do that. So it was me and David and one other guy. And this is the first team. So this is from 1955. This is Gough 1. So they were from Cambridge University, and they were sort of the pioneers of some of the work that we were still doing out on the island. So we were in contact with their zoologist, who's called Michael Swales, who is somewhere in the middle here, while we were down there, which is really cool because you get to sort of hear what the island was like and how little it's changed since then. And this was home, so this is the base. It's called edges. So in big winter storms, it shakes all the time and bits fall off it and all sorts. You sometimes wonder if you're still going to be there in the morning. Apparently the roof fell off once. And we actually we got back from Gough once from a monitoring trip, and one of the walls had just fallen out outside, so you could just see straight into the base. And obviously you have to deal with that as the 10 of you because no one's going to come and fix it for you. But we grew to love it, and it was nice to have hot showers and things, which is we haven't always had on field work.
Right, so the next slide just gives a few statistics which just show ecologically how important Gough really is. So yeah, home to over 8 million birds from at least 24 different species. That's thought to be quite a conservative estimate of the number of birds on Gough. The majority of those 24 different species are seabirds, but it actually has 2 endemic land birds, the Gough bunting and the Gough moorhen, which we've got pictures of here. So as you can see, the moorhen is very similar to moorhens we get in this country, but it is an endemic species, although they've now translocated a few to nearby Tristan just to try and keep the population going. So Gough buntings estimated between 500 and 1,000 pairs, so barely any left in the world. And then Gough moorhens between 1,000 and 3,000 pairs. But still not many. The buntings are a lovely little bird. They're incredibly inquisitive, especially the youngsters, which sometimes if we were stopping for lunch or something, young buntings would hop right up to you, sometimes even hop onto your leg and sort of peck away at your lunch, which is very nice. So yeah, on to some of the impressive seabird stats. So it's not Tristan albatross and Atlantic petrel, they're pretty much endemic to Gough. Gough holds 99% of the population, so pretty much if we lose Gough, we lose these species. And then it's a very important colony for other species of albatross. So yeah, holding 1/3 of the global population of sooty albatrosses. And the second largest AYN is Atlantic yellow-nosed albatross colony. So Gough has the 3 species of albatross. And then penguins as well. So it holds 90% of the global population of northern rockhoppers. Well, that breeds on the Tristan group. So rockhoppers are these guys with the impressive eyebrows or hairstyles. So there's another species of rockhopper called the southern rockhopper penguin, which nest places like the Falkland Islands, but they have much smaller eyebrows. So we think they're less impressive. So it's not just birds as well. So it's very important seal colony as well, which actually is one of the reasons why Gough is now facing such difficulties with introduced house mice, because of the seals attracting sailors to the island in the 19th century. But yeah, it supports the world's largest breeding population of subantarctic fur seals, which are these guys. So it's estimated around about 300,000 seals on the island, which is an incredible number, and it's thought around about 60,000 pups are born every year. And some of our work on the island, which we'll go on to talk about later, actually involved doing work with these guys as well. Right, and then a bit onto the habitat types. So neither Em or me are particularly good with botany. I'm sure lots of you are better. But Gough is characterised by 5 habitat types. So we go from the coastal tussock to fern bush to wet heath, and as you're getting higher into the highlands, into more sphagnum bogs and moorland. For us, it felt quite tropical when we were in the lowlands of the island, walking through the fern bush and the tussock, and then it felt increasingly Scottish when you got into the moorland and the highlands, sort of above 400, 500 metres or so. The fern bush habitat is characterised by these 2 species, the bog fern, the blechnum, and also phylica trees, which we've got a picture of here. So we've got the blechnum on the left, and then the phylica on the right, which a young Atlantic yellow-nosed is making use of for shelter. So the blechnum is endemic to the Tristan group of islands, but there are very closely related species in South America. And the phylica is found elsewhere, but it's very characteristic of the Tristan group of islands. We're not botanists, but we became very fond of these 2 species, especially as the birds make really good use of them for shelter, as you can see on the right-hand side. But we did also curse them quite a lot, because invariably they were always growing over paths and things like that, making the walking that much harder to walk around. So a few more stats for you. So yeah, by quite a few, Gough is regarded as the most important seabird island in the world, and from these numbers you can see why. So obviously, when you're working with many species that nest down in burrows, which large numbers of Gough species do, are burrow nesters, it does become a bit of an imprecise art counting everything. And Gough also has 3 to 4 species of storm petrel, and storm petrels are notoriously difficult for locating the burrows and being able to count them, because the burrows can be absolutely tiny little entrances. But yeah, it's thought that these estimates could well be quite conservative, because of the Gough covers around about 8,000 hectares, and even in the highlands of the island, it's absolutely riddled with burrows. It's absolutely covered. It's such an important island. So yeah.
So the RSPB sends the 3 biologists out, so it tends to be 2 seabirders and a botanist. So we were very much the seabird side of it. Neither of us are good at plants, as many of you will know from plant surveys with me. So the majority of our time was spent with 16 of the 24 bird species that are breeding on the island. So the main reason for our work was to collect baseline data before a mouse eradication that some of you might have heard of. It's been in the news quite a lot. It was planned for this year, but like so many other things, it was scuppered by coronavirus, so they're planning it again for next year. So we were collecting a lot of the pre-eradication data so that can then be compared after the eradication to make sure that it's been successful, and also to gather information on the effect that introduced house mice are having. So we split our time sort of evenly between albatross, giant petrel and penguin work, burrow nesting stuff, and then a little bit with the land birds, with the Gough moorhens and the buntings. So I could spend all day talking about our work because it's so much fun, and it was just great. We absolutely loved it. But I won't go into too much detail. I'll just give you a few of the highlights. So we weighed rockhopper penguins. So at specific intervals through their breeding season, we had to collect certain numbers of chicks and adults and weigh them, which looks very undignified, but this is the best way to do it, both for the birds and for us. And we definitely got off worse. These are the hardest birds I've ever handled. They are so strong and they are so painful. So they fight back with bills, claws and flippers. And I actually had to prise one off David's nipple at one point. He was screaming. So we also did population counts of a lot of the species. So this is sort of shows quite well what we're up against. So this is just one part of one monitoring colony of one species. So this is rockhopper penguins. So it's you do a lot of counting. It could be quite difficult. And I took on the Atlantic yellow-nosed albatross monitoring, or mollies as they're called by the Tristans, the locals. So this was one of my favourite parts of the job. So I'd visit my colony every day, and I'd record lay dates, hatching dates, and then eventually fledging dates. And we'd also weigh eggs, and we would read the rings of birds and also attach rings to the chicks and to any adults that didn't have them. And they're beautiful. We called this lady Snappy because she was right on the main path, so you'd see her pretty much every day, and she was quite grumpy. And in the same way, David took charge of monitoring the sooty albatrosses. So these guys nest along cliffs. So he would have to go along the cliffs, climb down onto the ledges and check out what was going on with those guys. And we had a monitoring colony of prions, which is this bird, which was completely new to us. So this monitoring colony was in a cave, which is sort of bizarre to think of birds nested in a cave. And these birds are amazing. So they get called whale birds. So you can see they've got this big wide bill, and there's baleen inside, the same as a humpback whale. So they're filter feeders. They're filtering out plankton and other little bits of food. And they're also really noisy. They've got this really weird eerie call, and they kind of set one another off. So you'll be in the cave and someone will start shouting at you, and they'll just set everyone off, and there's just sort of this cacophony going around the whole cave. It's really weird. So I also collected a lot of information on the burrow nesting species. So this is me with our burrow camera with my arm shoulder deep in the ground into a burrow. So this was with petrels and shearwaters mostly, which would have been great, except we had 3 different burrow cameras and they were all hopeless. They broke constantly. But when they were working, this is what you saw. So you put your hand down with one end of the burrow cam and you'd see, so this is a great shearwater on a nest and it looks like it's gearing up to bite whoever is holding the other end. So we also did some dissections. So if you came across a recently dead bird, you'd bring it back to base, dissect it to see if there was plastic inside it. And sure enough, there usually was. So this guy had this in his stomach. And we also took photographs of the wings of Tristan albatrosses. So these are the really big ones, the wanderers. And also we did it for giant petrels as well. So this was for a study of how they molt and when they molt, sort of the timing of it, because we don't know a lot of information about these birds still.
That single wing there is probably about 5 to 6 feet long, that single wing. So if you think the other foot wing out, so you're talking about 10 to 12 foot a total wingspan. And we also collected an albatross blood sample, which was one of the more interesting days on the island. So this is a bit complicated. So wandering albatrosses were split into 4 subspecies a few years ago. So wandering is one and Tristan is another. So this bird was breeding on Gough, but this is a French ring. So it had been ringed on one of France's subantarctic islands where Tristan albatrosses don't breed, but wandering albatrosses do. So we didn't know whether this bird was a Tristan albatross that was born on Gough and had just been wandering about and happened to be caught on this French island and ringed there, or was it a wandering albatross that was born and ringed as a chick on the other island, the French island, and was now breeding on Gough, which would be the first time, so it would have added to the breeding list, which would have been very exciting. But because they're so closely related, they're identical. So the only way that you can tell for sure is to get a blood sample and do a DNA test, which we did. So we never done it before. We never done anything like that. So our boss emailed over actually a page of instructions of how you take a blood sample from an albatross, and we did rock paper scissors on who would hold the bird and who would who would take the blood. But it all went fine. The bird was completely unfazed, and it turned out it's not a wandering albatross. It was just a Tristan albatross that liked to wander and had happened to be ringed on this French island. So this was where we were going to show our first video. So this was going to be the noise on the island, because it's so noisy and it's quite hard to describe. So we'll try and show you at the end. Okay, so Em's talked about the seabird monitoring aspect of our role, which accounted for the majority of our time, but we also had other duties as the biologists on the island. So yeah, seabird and also subantarctic fur seal monitoring. So here we have, so on the left, that's me ringing a young Tristan albatross chick. You can see they're absolutely massive. It's almost the size of me. And then that's Em on the right holding a subantarctic fur seal pup. It looks a little bit shocked by whatever Em's doing to it. So every 2 months, we would have to weigh 50 male and 50 female subantarctic fur seal pups. You can sex them basically by being a bit undignified and just checking whether they have 1 hole or 2 holes. The reason for this is to plot growth curves year on year, basically to see how well the seals are feeding, and from that you can work out what fish stocks are like. So when the pups are first born and they're just a few kilograms each, it's pretty straightforward doing 100 in a day. But as they gradually put on weight, they can get between 10 and 20 kilograms, and when you're doing 100 of those, you're certainly feeling it by the end of the day. But it means you don't need to go to the gym, so that's good. So we also did some plant work. So that's why one of our team was a botanist. So I know that lots of you have been involved in piri removal along the Northumberland coast. So Sagina procumbens, which is the invasive plant that we were required to remove, it's quite similar to piri. So it was accidentally introduced to the island in the late 1990s. And because it's mat forming, it threatens the unique upland flora of Gough. It has the potential to block off burrows for all the burrow nesting birds, and also just eliminate all the lovely native flora that the island's so important for. Fortunately, at the moment, it's only confined to 400 meters of coastline by the base, but we were regularly required to treat these areas with herbicide. Because it's confined to the cliffs, it also means that we were, so this is the Sagina at the top, and then this is one of us abseiling down one of the sea cliffs as well, because it thrives in really exposed, on exposed ground. They thought on one year that the way to get rid of it was to strip all the soil off, so it had nothing to actually grow on, little knowing that Sagina actually thrives on really basically as just awful conditions. So nothing else grows, but this Sagina thrives. So they actually made everything worse by stripping the soil. Yeah, it wasn't the most fun job walking around, but we quite enjoyed the actual abseiling aspect of it, especially when you'd had a big storm the day before and the swell would crash the waves right up to where you were dangling down from. Good fun. Right, and finally, biosecurity. So biosecurity is incredibly important for an island like Gough, because it is so unique and it was so pristine until humans came along and mucked things up a little bit. So the hope at some point is that Gough will return to the pristine state that it once was before humans unintentionally introduced invasive species. But until that time, it's the role of the biologists each year just to make sure that anything that comes onto the island is free of seeds and pests, because we're now seeing firsthand the dire consequences if these things aren't kept in check. So we're also quite a big aspect of that job, which will lead into the eradication program, was getting rid of these guys. So house mice really are see Becky there. House mice really are causing just awful problems on Gough. Also, the base would get completely swamped with them. There's so many mice on the island. They're at such densities. So we caught in a year, we caught well over 1,000 just on the base. And if you think that's such a small part of the island, and if we'd had more traps out, I have no doubt that we would have caught many more. But that was basically for hygiene reasons. But they really need to be eradicated for reasons, as we'll go on to say. So yeah, this takes us quite nicely onto the Gough eradication, Gough Island restoration program. So because of its vast fur seal numbers, as I said earlier, estimated 300,000, and it also has elephant seals as well. Gough used to be visited by sailors hunting the animals in the 19th century. So it's thought that house mice aboard these boats that were coming to Gough regularly to hunt the seals hopped off and made it onto the island. And if only we'd known then what we know now, the devastation that just a few individual mice are now causing to all the seabirds. So if you think the 19th century, the 1800s, it's not actually very long ago. It's sort of around about 200 years ago. And if you take a species like the wandering albatross that can live for more than 50 years, you're only looking at sort of the four lifespans of a wandering albatross that the mice have been on that island for. But in just 2 centuries, they've evolved to exploit all available food sources on the island, which now, most unfortunately, relies heavily on the seabird population of Gough. Obviously, when you've got 10 million birds, which are year-round breeders as well, it's a sort of all-you-can-eat buffet for the mice. So yeah, with so many birds, it's meant that these are now the largest house mice in the world. So they're actually a separate subspecies now because they're 50% larger than house mice, say, we get in this country and in other countries around the world. So as I said, unlike seabird reserves in the UK, where seabirds generally arrive in the spring, will have their young, and then they generally, places like the Farne Islands, Gough, they've generally left the island by late summer because they've bred, and then they're either heading back out to sea or they're migrating south. The food supplies around Gough are so plentiful that it has year-round breeders. So you have some species which will only lay their eggs in the winter, which was quite strange for us, having worked on UK reserves. You also have species like the Tristan albatross, which require the best part of a year to successfully raise a chick to fledging age. It's about 11 months it takes for a Tristan albatross to lay an egg, raise it to, and then raise the chick to fledging. Which is why Tristan albatross is, because it's such an undertaking to successfully raise a chick. They will probably only raise a chick once every 2 years so that they can have a year off just to recover body condition and such. Because Gough seabirds have evolved on predator-free islands, it means that they have no anti-predator response, which basically mean that they're completely at the mercy of mice. So the estimate at the bottom of 2 million eggs and chicks predated by mice every year, again, is thought to be really conservative. This was based on a study that was done about 10 years ago now, where they actually monitored certain species to see how many were taken by the mice. And it's obviously completely unsustainable to be losing this number of birds and chicks, chicks and eggs every year. And it's, it is leading to extinctions. So something has to be done.
So there's three aims to this eradication that's supposed to be happening next year. So to prevent the extinction of the critically endangered birds on the island, to restore Gough to its natural state, how it should be without us meddling, and then to support the Tristan people to be custodians for the island and to protect it in the future. So this was going to be our next video. So this is quite a harrowing one. It's quite graphic because the mice literally will eat the albatrosses and the other birds. They eat them alive over the course of several nights. So it's really horrible to watch. But it's I think it's quite important to see, just to see sort of the devastation that's being caused. So we'll try that one later as well.
We'll also warn you when we're about to play it, because I'm aware, like, we get quite upset watching it, and if you'd rather not see it, we'll warn you before so you can look away.
So this is what we know about what the mice are doing. So again, because Gough is so remote and there hasn't been much research done out there, we don't really know the extent of the problem. But what we do know is pretty rough. So for the Tristan albatross chicks, only about a quarter are now surviving to fledging, and in some years it's as low as 10%. So you can compare that to other islands of wandering albatross chicks, where it's generally kind of 60 to 70% survival rate. So to get down to as low as 10% is pretty shocking. So it's meaning that the Tristan albatross population is now decreasing at about 3 to 5% a year. So something needs to be done pretty quickly if they're going to survive. And it's also affecting the winter breeding burrowing petrels. So Atlantic petrels and grey petrels are being quite hard hit as well. And as 99% of the population of Atlantic petrels breed on Gough, and they're now sort of 20% maximum survive each year. Again, that's not good news. And then other things, so the McGilvey's prion, which we've already shown you. So there were two years of data where in the monitoring colony there wasn't a single chick fledged. Every nest failed, and obviously if that happens too often, that's really bad news. And again, the critically endangered Gough bunting isn't found anywhere else in the world. There might be as little as 500 pairs left, so it's not going to be long before these guys are extinct.
Just to go back to the prions, the whale birds that Em was talking about earlier. They're quite an interesting species, partly because they're nesting in caves, which is just a bit zany for seabirds. But the McGilvery's prion, this particular species on Gough, so it was only first discovered on Gough in 2013, so pretty recently. And at the time, it was classified as a subspecies of another species of prion that was found elsewhere. However, research like the stuff that we were doing found out that they were actually breeding at a completely different time to this other species. So then McGilvery's was classified as a full species in 2016, so only 4 years ago, which shows the kind of mysteries on Gough. There's still many to be found out. So because Gough is so remote and so inaccessible, it's not uncommon to discover new things about the flora and fauna, which makes it incredibly exciting and a real privilege to go there. A guy called Alex Bond, who was our science coordinator whilst we were on Gough, a few years before us, him and one other spent a night camping on a part of the island that people don't usually camp in. And that night they heard a species called a blue petrel calling. They heard the calls all around them. So that morning they decided to take a burrow camera out and start sticking it down some of the burrows. And they found nesting blue petrels around them. And blue petrels weren't known to actually nest on Gough until that night when they actually heard them around them. So that was just a few years ago. It's discoveries that like this that makes it really worrying that with the mice causing the devastation that they are, that we might be losing knowledge and species before they're even discovered. So yeah, the eradication really is vital.
So how's this eradication gonna happen? So being so remote and so accessible and all of that, it just makes everything really complicated. But if any of you are familiar with the rat eradication that happened on the Shants up in Scotland, it's going to be quite similar. So it's going to use poison bait. So they've got a lot of Kiwis involved. So the people in New Zealand have been doing this for sort of 60 years. They're leading the way. So there's a lot of the world experts are involved. It's going to cost about £7 million, they think, to do. And so it's going to involve 40 people, 4 helicopters and 2 diggers. So how do you get all those people from all around the world and all of this bait, all these helicopters to this incredibly remote island? And how do you then make sure that if there's something wrong with one of the helicopters, say, the whole thing doesn't just fall apart? And then obviously there's no repair shop, you can't go to the mechanic. So what do you do in that situation? So there's so much that has had to been thought through and planned. And I sympathise for whoever has to write the risk assessments for this, because it must be awful. So it was planned for between February and October this year, which is the southern winter, but it's been put back to next year because of the pandemic. So they've chosen the southern winter because that gives you the best chance of success. So it's when the fewest breeding seabirds are around. So there's sort of the less chance of accidentally causing extinctions. You don't want these really rare birds eating poison bait and then accidentally making them extinct. And it also means that there's the least food available for the mice at that time of year. They're the hungriest, so they're the most likely then to eat the poison bait. And obviously when it costs that much and it's so difficult, you don't really have a second chance, so it needs to work the first time round. So once everything gets set up, the team have to wait for a weather window. So winter on Gough can be quite wet and wild. There's not going to be so many days they can get the helicopters out to be doing bait drops. So they need 2 rounds of bait spreading, which will be helicopters covering the whole island with bait. And during that time, they have to make sure that every mouse is going to come into contact with at least 1 bait pellet and is going to eat it. Because even if they left 1 pregnant female on the island, they breed so quickly and they're so well adapted that they could just repopulate the whole place quite quickly. So that plan has to take into account the ecology of the house mice, the food ranges, their breeding populations, and even their preference for the colour and taste of the food. And then the other big thing that they have to consider is aviculture. So they're going to have to take Gough buntings and Gough moorhens into captivity because they're land birds, so they're not going to be on migration like the seabirds. And we don't want to cause these guys to go extinct either. So they're going to take enough of them into captivity so that they can then re-release them, hopefully when the island is mouse free, so that they won't be damaged by the eradication.
Yeah, so as Em alluded to, the weather on Gough is very unpredictable. So sitting in the middle of the South Atlantic as it does and being quite mountainous means that cloud cover can be a real issue, which is going to make it very difficult for helicopters to fly. It also means that on average around about 3,000 millimetres of rainfall every year on the island. It's also in the roaring 40s, so it can be incredibly windy, as Em has said. And if conditions are too harsh, it means that, yeah, the helicopters just can't fly. Ideally, there needs to be around about 3 days of flying time for each, using 4 helicopters, which equates essentially to 12 flying days, and that's for one bait drop. And a full bait drop needs to be done twice. So we're saying sort of maybe about 3 weeks or so, as well as running extra treatments of poison bait over high risk areas. So areas that are from the surveys have shown to be particularly hard to reach, or areas that are particularly prone to having higher densities of mice. So it doesn't sound like too much to ask that after years of planning and huge amounts of money, yeah, it comes down to about 2 to 3 weeks of flying time. So it's going to be a very, very nervous wait for a lot of the people down on the island at the time, just hoping and praying that the weather clears enough that they can get the helicopters up into the highlands and spreading this bait. So it's because the conditions are so rubbish, it's estimated that the entire 3 months that they've allowed for the baiting window will be needed to get those flying days to be able to drop the bait. Yeah.
So they did a feasibility study for this in 2013, and they made a quick video which is kind of shows the method, and it also shows the terrain on Gough really well. So again, we'll try and show you that in a minute.
So yeah, so monitoring will have to continue for 2 years after the eradication attempt to look for any rodent presence. So this can be done by you can use little wax blocks. You can actually make them by melting candles and then adding peanut butter or cocoa powder to it to make them flavoursome, and then you leave them at strategic points around islands because the mice will be drawn to them, and you'll check these blocks on a regular basis, looking for tooth marks gnawing on these. Yeah, fingers crossed that these wax blocks will go out and there'll be no gnawing marks, and will, after 2 years of having none of these signs, Gough will be able to be declared rodent free, which is what the Shants were declared in March in 2018. So we're hoping for a similar success as the Shant Islands had. Right, so again, this is where another one of our videos came, which was we're realizing that everything's a little bit somber, all the statistics, as yeah, it's a little bit bleak, so we thought we'd end on a slightly lighter note. So hopefully this video works when we play it. It's basically a video to celebrate all things albatross, and to show the awkward puberty that albatrosses go through.
So we were so privileged to be able to spend a year on this island. We've both done field work in quite a few different places now, but this was just so special. So we have to thank the RSPB and Tristan Conservation Department for letting us go out and live there. And thank you for listening. So we could do questions now, or we could do videos now.
Yeah, whichever. Becky's the boss, isn't she? Becky can make a decision.
Let's see the videos.
Okay. Em's the techno wizard, so I'll let her do it.
I don't know about techno wizard.
Remember the sound.
Oh no. Hang on.
I'm going to start with calls.
So can everyone hear us? Okay, so this is the first one. This is it's not that you can't see anything, but hopefully you'll be able to hear what we heard every night and kept us awake.
Did that work? Could people hear that? Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Okay.
The next ones might be a bit more challenging because they rely on video as well as sound, so it might be a bit jerky when you watch it, but it should give you